everyone, my name is Kat Savage and I'm a professional artist, clinical hypnotherapist and well-being expert working with those in the creative arts sector. In my line of work, I get to meet some amazing, colourful people, from actors to artists, people who live their lives by their own rules, fueled by passion and determination to bring their unique talents into the world. I wanted to discover what it took for people to leave the usual 9 to 5 and hop on a dream, to capture their bravest moments and share these meaningful conversations with you, so that together we can explore the ideas, emotions and moments that could potentially change our lives too. So let's keep talking, have some fun and enjoy the show. This week on the show, we speak to multidisciplinary large-scale and studio fine artist, Tony Plant. If you live near a beach in Cornwall, you may have come across one of Tony's mammoth beach pieces whilst looking down over a cliff edge. Or maybe you've been wandering through a National Trust site and caught something unusual created in the landscape. If it's big art and it's in the landscape, it's most likely Tony that has created it. In the studio, Tony's paintings, full of movement and memory, capture the natural world in a different way, with all of his work living in symbiosis and reflection of each other. Featured on radio, TV, and in the newspapers, Tony's work inspires conversations on our connection to place, environmental issues, and most importantly, conversations with each other. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the wonderful ingenuity of Tony Plant. Tony Plant, welcome to the Brave Moment. How are you doing, sir?
Hi, Kat. I'm okay. I just come through the other end of man flu, so I'm a bit groggy, but I'm still fighting.
I love that you've still come on and you're doing this interview anyway. What a absolute trooper. Thank you so much.
No, thanks. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. So I was trying to figure out a way to describe your art on the show, but I just can't describe it other than it's mammoth. So how would you describe to our listeners exactly what it is that you do?
I draw on beaches. The thing that you're talking about is drawings on beaches, but I'm a painter, so I've been painting since forever, and the beach drawing is just an extension of the painting. One feeds into the other, really. They are quite big. They can be a few hundred meters across, which is a good scale to work at because you can't be precious about things. And so I make work in the landscape, but it's never intended to stay, that are partnered with paintings back in the studio, and vice versa. There's paintings in the studio that partnered with drawings out in the landscape. So that's the kind of work that I do.
That's absolutely incredible. And if you go on to Tony Plant's Instagram, listeners, then you can see just what we're talking about right here. When did you begin this passion for painting, especially with the landscape, especially outside, as opposed to, I don't know, like portraiture or any of the other sort of disciplines that you could have chosen?
And I don't know. It's just I've always drawn. So I was at school. I was that kid that was drawing, and I kind of got steered through the school system and ended up being pointed towards a careers advisor. Came and said, right, you can clearly draw, so you should do this. So I kind of went off and started to study. It was called scientific and technical graphics, and I broke out in a rash. I just hated it. It was awful. It was drawing photographically, which I can do, which is why they pointed me towards it. But it's just so, for me, it was just so crushing because you knew what the outcome was the second you started. It was, and it held no interest to me whatsoever. But just because I could do it, that was the way I was pointed. The single bravest thing I did was to leave that very first course. That was the first decision I ever made for myself. So I'd kind of been, up to that point, I'd been steered towards because I could do things. And I got to this place and I spent a year there and absolutely hated it. And And I thought, no, I'm off. I can't do this. But the second I left, things became, I don't know about clearer, but certainly freer. And it certainly started moving in a direction which was more in my control rather than having things suggested to me and not really knowing how to say no.
It's so funny that you should say that, because nearly every single person that's been on the Brave Moment has come to the decision that their brave moment has been born out of saying no to something, or saying no to someone who's steering your direction, and actually just taking on what it is that makes you passionate for yourself. And it is a struggle, and it is confusing, because you've got so many people that are almost relying on you to be the person that they want you to be, when inside you know that that's not who you really are. So can you remember, like, how did you get through that decision? Who did you tell? Who could you rely on back then to support you through that decision?
At the time, I think, I suppose I spoke to the folks, but ultimately my plan was always to go traveling anyway when I'd finished that course. So I just went off and did that. So I packed up, I just went with a couple of cameras and a surfboard and went off to Australia and Indonesia, and when I was there, I had a friend in Canberra, and to cut a long story short, I ended up just kind of blagging my way into art colleges in Canberra because you could. No one checked, and so I went off, and it made perfect sense to me. I understood that, and what they were doing, I totally got, and there was materials kicking around, and there were good people, and there were trips away at the weekend and places to go. I had no connections to anything, and so I was totally into that. When I came back, I'd found out that what I was interested in was called fine art. But I didn't even know what fine art was. Nobody in my family is remotely connected to anything like this. So I had heard of somewhere called Goldsmiths. I don't know how I'd heard of it, but I had, and so I found it in the A to Z, and I went there. And I walked in the door, and I went to the lady in the front and said, "Look, can I talk to the boss about something?" And she said, "You'll have to wait." So I waited all day, and eventually I got through to this guy who's called Professor Rutherford. He was an absolute
what
gent.
a name!
Yeah, well, yeah, fabulous man too, wonderful. And I got through to him, and I walked into this amazing office. I explained what happened, and then once I'd finished talking, he said, "Okay, well, I meet one or two people like you every year who've kind of gone through the system." This is when you used to get a grant to go to study. They've gone through the system, made a bad choice, and now know what they want to do. So the colleges actually do want people like you, because you know what you want to do and you will finish. So the problem you've got is that you're going to get no more funding. So you're going to have to pay. So if you're going to have to pay, you may as well get the best. So unofficially, I'm going to write you a list of where to apply and in what order. So he did. And so I took the list, I applied, I got in, and I did my degree. I did my foundation course, and then I did the degree. So
how did it feel different to your previous degree, which you absolutely hated? What was the difference between the two?
It was totally up to me. Everything, the choices were completely mine. I could go down literally any route I wanted to, and I was encouraged to do so. And I was surrounded by brilliant people who I thought were brilliant, and I still do. And tutors like Trevor Sutton and Roger Ackling, Helen Chadwick, they were amazing people, I think, firstly, and they also made really, to me, really interesting work, and you got steered towards tutors that you would seem to be best suited with, and that time there was fantastic. But what it meant was that because I didn't have any funding, I was going to have to get through any way I could. So I lived in squats for 4 years to get through art school. So picking things up and carrying things along and taking things with me and working with what I've got has been what I've always had to do. And it's what even when I've had opportunities to use amazing facilities and materials and opportunities, I do, but not necessarily what I might have expected to use when I first walked into that situation. Sometimes I end up looking for the things which have been almost cast aside and have not been laid out on a table, the things that have been kind of put to one side because maybe they don't quite fit, I tend to go towards those kind of materials and objects. And so I look for those kind of objects and things to make work with now. I still do all these years later. That's what I'm looking for. So I use found objects, and a beach is pretty much a found object. It's going to be different every time you stumble across it.
That's really, really interesting that you say that you go for the things that people almost cast aside because they feel like they're not useful or they're not correct for what they're doing. What do you think people miss in art? Like, what do you wish you could see more of in the art scene, especially today?
I think this idea of a throwaway society is something that has to be a huge concern. I mean, in the short term, not that I'm qualified to say anything at all, but I think I've seen the colour of beaches change. When you get storms, they rage and they're huge and they're dramatic, and people tie themselves to masts and paint paintings about them and this kind of thing. But where they finally die, when there's literally nothing left, when they're completely spent and their last tiny bit of energy is just like, that's it, and then it starts to retreat back down the beach. That furthest most line where all the heavy stuff has been filtered out and it's just down to the tiniest little granules now. Used to be sand, and it used to be sticks, and it used to be little dry bits of driftwood, which were the really fine sticks that were hollow, almost like straws. It used to be that. Now it's plastic, and it's plastic that's opaque because it's been rolled around in the sea. And it's purple and blues and whites, almost like sea glass, but it's not as cute. And it's everywhere, and it's not even on the surface anymore. It's right the way through. So you get to that top line, you dig down, and it's there. So then, what I try and do with my drawings is the successful drawings are the ones that make people stop. And I intentionally give little or no, well, not even little. I give no information at all, because I don't think there is one truth in this at all. There's plenty of truths, loads of them, and to suggest there's only one is misleading. So I think I'd rather not do that. But what I like is when people stop at the cliff, look down because they've seen the drawing, look at the drawing for a little while, but they're not. I mean, other than being big and unexpected, they're not really. There's nothing special about them. You stop for long enough to see them, and then you have to look outside them. You've got to look outside them, because your eye won't stay within it. And they're drawn in such a way, the good ones, successful ones, will lead your eye out of them. It will take your eye away to other features in the landscape that might be headlands or rock pools or streams or lines of rocks or pathways where people probably are going to appear through, or rocks that people are possibly going to appear through. And then you've got the tide coming in to take that away. So what happens is that on a successful one, people will sit down and watch these things being taken away. And that's when the conversations can start to happen. And that's when then they can start talking, and people do start talking about the environment and what's going on with it and what their memory is of it and how they want to pass this on. Because people end up on cliff, they literally don't end up on a cliff top by accident. They plan to be there. And so people are taking time out of busy lives to get to these places where there's nothing. I mean, they're just going to go to a place where there is simply a horizon. And then suddenly they stumble across a beach drawing, with no explanation. And there's a couple of other people standing around. So they may kind of, as is human nature, they may walk around them, but they may walk up to them and have a little chat. And they may decide to sit down and watch the tide come in and take this thing away for a few minutes. And then conversations start to happen and memories get made and stories get told. And I think painting and art and environment all deal with and conjure up stories and narratives. And once those things start being shared between people, then real conversations start to happen, not the kind of how you doing, where have you been kind of thing. But proper conversations start to happen, and they can be fascinating. I've heard mad stories up on cliff tops from people, and really personal things that I wouldn't have expected to be let in on with a complete stranger within a few minutes of meeting them. These things just kind of people are looking for an opportunity these days to stop for long enough to actually have conversations. And there's, that those opportunities are few and far between, I think, because people are constantly moving and head down and on tablets and iPhones and whatever it is, always going to the next thing. But if you can interrupt them somewhere midway along that journey between A and B, and you can just stop them for a short period of time with anything, I don't know, a podcast or a photograph or a painting or poetry or theatre or something, just a garden, just stop people for long enough, they will stop, and they want to stop. It's a really powerful thing.
Yeah. And just hearing you talk about that, you said something really powerful just then, which was people want to stop. And I see this all the time. People need to stop and they want to stop. But for some reason, we just keep going and keep pushing through this sort of daily grind. And we forget just what sort of startling nature, what startling imagery and universe we have all around us.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're giving someone a place to stop and have that kind of catalyst of conversation with someone else, that's really, really beautiful. It must, I mean, are you aware of that as you're creating? Does it make its way into your work, or is it just something that kind of, this is going to sound taboo, but does it get in the way of what you're doing because you're in such a short time frame to create it?
Yeah, that's good, because I wear a hat sometimes, and the hat, it's got a big brim on it, and it's basically a filter, because you're right, there's very little time on these drawings when the whole place is going to be available to be drawn on, so you are up against the clock to some extent.
I can imagine it like a little intrusion. Like you can feel that energy at your peripheral. And I suppose, does the hat kind of symbolize that you're in your workplace and it's kind of like a talisman barrier?
With the hat, it allows me to see people's feet when they get close. And so depending on what angle my head's at, sometimes I can stop. And I think I always do. If someone comes up, I always speak, because it'd be rude not to. But sometimes I just don't have much time because I am rushing against the clock. But dog walkers are amazing people to talk to about beaches, because they go to beaches once, twice, 3 times a day sometimes, and they have done for years and years and years. And every now and again they say, "Oh, I've never seen it. I've been coming here for 40 years. I've never seen it looking like this." That's quite a nice thing to hear. I like that. That's a nice thing to be able to do.
It's, I mean, just, looking at your account, it's astounding the work that you do in the studio and outside of the studio as well. Which discipline do you, and I say discipline loosely, which part of your artistic expression do you prefer? Which one do you find more challenging? Which one are you more passionate about? Or are they just symbiotic?
They're both the same thing, but I see them as the same thing. Right. So if I get asked to make a drawing, or I go somewhere to draw, I turn up for a few days. Sometimes it can take weeks. Some of these things can take years to actually, before they actually happen, because you've got to wait for the tides and the weather to line up, and for me to be in the right place, and all these kind of things everything has to align for them to happen. But the paintings at the minute I'm using GPS trackers and Strava, actually, which turns out to be absolutely brilliant, to track movements through the landscape.
Wow!
And across the sea. So I've got a canoe now, and I'm moving around by canoe, which has been absolutely brilliant to do, and to be able to track. So if I stop paddling, I keep moving, and I'm moving at the mercy almost of the elements. So I'm being pulled across the surface of the sea by currents, or I'm being driven across the surface of the sea by wind. The movements themselves are being governed by structures within, below, and above the sea as well. So underwater rocks, which all have names, it turns out, if you talk to fishermen. And these names have been passed on from one generation to the next. Literally father to son, or father to daughter, and daughter to whatever. And they've been passed on, and different rocks have different significance. They could be a dangerous thing. They could be a thing which is, could potentially hold or wreck your boat, or they could be a place where you're pretty much guaranteed to get a bite of fish, or they may be used as markers to identify a safe route through. They're not just rocks, and this canoe is kind of drifting across the sea, being moved by currents which are moving around those rocks, and that's the kind of work I'm making at the minute.
I mean, obviously this morning before we had this interview, I was stalking your Instagram a little bit just to see what's been happening recently. And I love how loose and painterly the painting is compared to the intricacy of your beach work. And I was thinking, one must have to be very, very precise, whilst the other one must have to be really, really loose. Like, how does your body change as you're creating, say, a painting compared to how your body reacts to creating a beach scene?
Which one are you assuming is loose and which one are you assuming is tight? The beach drawing or the painting?
It's really, I would say your painting appears, and I say appears in quote marks, to be loose in the way that it's sort of expressed. Whilst when I look at your beach art, it seems very intricate and just very precise. Like,
that's interesting because it's not. The beach drawing is, you can't be tight on a line which is 100 meters long, and you've got to do 40 of them before you go on to the next one. You just can't do it. Your eye sees pretty much what it wants to see. So just because there's a line on a beach drawing in a particular place doesn't mean it's in the right place. It's just that's where the line is. I think from the top of the cliff, a viewer looking down onto a beach drawing that I make anyway, it isn't going to be a proper circle. And if it was, it wouldn't look the same. In the last few years, I've been drawing beach drawings in the dark to keep things super, super light and kind of not irreverent, but just not precious. I think to remain unprecious about stuff, about work, is really, for me, is the most important thing. It winds up my wife and kids every now and again. I do make a painting that the kids like. I've got one here now, which my eldest daughter, she said, "Oh no, what have you done?" And it said, that was my favourite painting. I've routed it out again and stuck lollipop sticks in it, and she was gutted. But so to remain unprecious, I think, is good. It keeps it moving, and it keeps it interesting for me, and it has to be, because otherwise, why would you make them? Why would you make these things? So the beach drawings aren't that accurate.
It's so, I'm just so curious about it, and just listening to you now, I'm going to take your advice, because I'm a novice painter. I like to do it for a bit of fun, but I'm so perfectionist about it, and I think maybe that's the problem with amateur painters, isn't it? We're always trying to get things to look how we think they should look, when really, if we were just a bit more inquisitive and curious about the process, then maybe we would have more success in finding the shapes and like you said, like the shades and the lights and all the different things that creates the perfect picture in the first place. If we looked at that first instead of seeing the whole picture, then maybe that would change our perception of what we're looking at.
Don't even think about the perfect picture. Just don't even think about that. Just draw. I mean, drawing big is a really good way to do it. Drawing in the dark big is fantastic. I haven't got a decent photograph yet, but it feels great. I'm loving doing these things at the minute. The night drawings and these night walks. But again, you even meet people. You meet people on the cliffs at night. It's quite strange when it happens, but it does happen. People are. There's people everywhere. And I suppose it's difficult, it's strange for them too. You've got some 6'3" bold bloke walking along the cliff with 2 or 3 rakes and a bunch of tripods hanging out of a rucksack at 2:00 in the morning. It must be slightly disconcerting. I try and be polite as best I can, but even that, I think sometimes you get that wrong. But I did something with the National Trust in Shropshire a couple of years ago. That was fantastic, actually. I got a commission. I'll get this number wrong, but it was something like 20,000 acres of heather.
Wow!
Certainly loads and loads, thousands and thousands of acres of of heather in the Shropshire Hills to make work in, and which I did, and it was wonderful. So rather than so I cut a big shape into bracken, which is an invasive plant. It wasn't just a random thing in a random place. There was a lot of work that went into it, and then I made this big series of cuts into the hillside. But at one point I was walking up to get to this place, because it took, I don't know, weeks to do. Walking up to this place, and a couple of people stopped to let me through in a really narrow bit, and we started to talk. And they said, "What are you doing?" I suddenly realised that I was walking through the Shropshire Hills with two, those big scythes you get. I think they're called scythes.
Like death
two big
scythes.
but on massive long handles, like really long handles, so you can swing them from a long way out. Two of those, one over each shoulder. I was walking along this beautiful English countryside towards these two poor people, across an ever narrowing track to the 6'3" bloke with two sides walking out of the sun.
I love this idea of sort of story as legacy, that we're all connected. It starts with, the idea from you, and then you have these sort of interactions with people, then you create the art, and that creates another story in the moment. And then it's almost becomes a historical story for many people. Like what do you hope people will take away from your work? What do you hope that those conversations would go like?
I don't think you can predict what these things are going to be. I think people do connect with landscape, and they're always looking to connect with landscape. The painters have always done it. Filmmakers, everyone does it. I think if you had a friend that you hadn't seen forever, and they'd moved away, and they were going to come back, and you were going to meet them, I'll pick you up at the airport. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to take them? Where would you take someone that you've not seen for 20 years? Go on. Where would you take them?
Where would I take them? Oh, you're asking me. I'm so excited. Do you know, I'd probably take them up to Ramehead, because it's just got the best view in the whole entire area of where I live. And it's just so dramatic. Yeah.
You've chosen a special place, and it is landscape. It's not a shopping centre. It's not something that's man-made. It's a place which is outside of the normal day, isn't it? It's a place where you've got memories of, and that's the place that you take people to. And people have those places. Everybody has those places. I was out taking photographs rather one day at Porthleven, and I walked further down the coast towards Rincey Head. Amazing day, huge blackberries in the hedgerows, and a pod of porpoises below a really steep cliff. So that's what I remember about that day, until I was walking back, it suddenly goes really flat, and it's old Cornish fields, and a couple of stiles over the hedges, and on the stiles you got a view of where you were going, but it wasn't a straight line. It was around the edges and across fields and whatever. And I could see this couple coming towards me every now and again, and eventually they were coming towards me, and I was going towards them. Eventually, our paths crossed, and to cut a long story short, they were going to a beach that they used to go to when they were courting, and they were late 70s, and they wanted to go back to this beach. They'd not been to it for a long time, but they couldn't get there. The older gentleman couldn't physically get over the stile. They couldn't do it. And I was kind of there for that moment when they suddenly couldn't get back to that place in the landscape that was so special to them. That was clearly their place, and he was no longer able to get there. And I remember being struck at the time, being struck by just how powerful that was. I mean, you've just said Ramehead. That's clearly your place, but everybody has that place. Everybody has a connection to somewhere in landscape. When you, luckily, with the work that I do, and being asked to make work in different places, I'm straight in to a conversation about landscape and memories of, and it involves, they always involve people or pets or something. It's usually people. I spent a bit of time in Ireland recently, and over the last few years, and I've got some kind of connection with that place. I don't know what it is, but I love it. It's just fantastic. I was born in Cornwall, but I don't know what the Irish thing is. there's something going on there for me, and I'd love to know what it was.
I've got a tattoo of a mountain range in Switzerland on my arm. It's a place called Grindelwald, which is coincidentally the name of my house and also an evil character in Harry Potter. But that's beside the point. But whenever I go there, and I've been going there since I was about 17, I cry. I get to that place and I burst into tears. And I've never been able to explain it. I can justify it, on a very sort of linear level and say, oh, it's because the landscape is so breathtaking, et cetera, because it is. But there's something about that place that is in my bones. That's the only way I can describe it. And it sounds like a similar situation is happening with you in Ireland.
Well, no, I absolutely believe you. I think everybody has that in some way. I mean, when you said you cry when you get to that landscape, I remember once I was in Ireland for a storm. There was a big storm coming, and I ended up. There's a wave in Ireland called Aileens. It's underneath the cliffs of Moher. I don't know if you know it. It's like 3 bedrooms and steps stacked up on top of each other.
Wow!
Huge wave at the bottom, and I think the first photos I saw of it were from a guy called Mickey Smith. You should definitely talk to Mickey. But I saw the photographs of that place, and as soon as I saw them, I thought, I really want to see this place. So after years and years, I finally got there. We went there on a jet ski, and we jumped off the jet ski into the water. There were 3 of us. 2 of them went back out to the back of it on the ski to sort themselves out. They were going to surf it. And I was floating around and bobbing around on the inside with a camera. I was going to photograph it, and I was being dragged towards a boil in the water, which you couldn't see until the swell came, and it would just rise up the face of the wave. I was being pulled towards it, and I clearly didn't want to be anywhere near that boil.
Yeah,
and it was freaking me out. It was really scaring me as I was being pulled towards it. So I thought, well, this isn't working. I need to change this. So it reminded me, the noise it was making, this gurgling noise, reminded me of an old neighbour I used to have when I was a kid, who used to have a lung condition, but he was a wonderful man. You could hear him walking along before you ever saw him. So I decided to call it Mr. Dungy. So the boy was now called Mr. Dungy and was now instantly nice, and I could deal with that. So that's just Mr. Dungy in the background. I'm just going to keep swimming for my life here. And I remember swimming across, and eventually I got away from this bloody boil. And I was sitting there, I've been in the water for a while. I still hadn't seen any of the surfers. They'd gone way out and just left me to my inevitable death. And I was sitting in the water, and I just started throwing up all over the camera.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh.
So landscape, yeah. So I understand. If you cry when you get to Grunewald or whatever it was, I threw up. So landscape does affect you. It's very powerful.
Oh my goodness, that's going to keep me going for ages. So we're coming to the end of the podcast. I've absolutely just loved talking to you. You're so inspiring. I'm definitely going to go for a massive walk after this. What advice would you give to those younger artists that are coming up the ranks? They're making those decisions about where they should go, what they should do. What advice do you wish that you'd heard when you were younger and you were just starting out?
I think I did hear the advice I wanted to hear when I did decide to not do something, but didn't know what it was that I did want to do. The second you're kind of driven to do something, things start to happen. But I think trying to predict what it's going to be, doesn't work for me. Being pre-prescribed about stuff doesn't work for me. I mean, going back to even those early learning how to draw that way didn't work for me at all. But when things are more open-ended and you don't know what it's going to look like, you don't know what's going to happen, that's when I get charged up. Because when I walk onto a beach, it's the same as looking at a blank canvas. It's a whole load of space, and I have absolutely no problem at all filling that space, whether it's a couple of feet or a couple of 100 meters. It doesn't. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those opportunities. So I think what I would say to anybody that was thinking of doing what they wanted to do what you want to do. It seems to make it's a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it? I don't know, but I wouldn't have the faintest idea how to advise them how to do what they want to do, and I wouldn't do it.
Do what you want to do, I think, is a mic drop moment anyway. So
Yeah. Oh, that probably sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But the intention was honest. I do apologize.
I love it. So I've got two more questions for you. One is, why is art important to us right now after this crazy pandemic? And even though we're still sort of going through it, why is it important to us now?
I think it always has been, isn't it? I think it's one of those things that does last. The good things, the good stuff does actually survive and get passed on. People are interested in what's happened because it sometimes helps what's going to come next. It does have an effect on people, and living with living with a painting, I think, is a beautiful thing to do, because you can hand these things on to people, you can give them to people. As precious as the Rain Head and Rain Peninsula is to you, you may have a painting of it which might have the colours or the shapes or a memory of it that you could give to somebody else, and that's not just giving them a painting, that's giving them something really special.
I've got one more question for you before I let you go and have man flu on your sofa for the rest of the day. If you were to be sat now with your 100-year-old self...
I almost am. I almost am sat now with my 100-year-old self. I'm well over halfway there.
Well, let's make him 120. What advice would your 120-year-old self give you for today moving forward? I
don't know. Even if I did give me advice, I wouldn't listen to it. I'm the last person you want to take advice from. I live in a house with 3 women. I've got a beautiful, gorgeous wife, and I've got 2 absolutely killer kids. I love them to bits. None of them take any notice of what I say. And so no one takes my advice. They maybe occasionally put on a cardigan or a jumper or a coat. That's about it. So I'd be qualified to advise on outdoor wear during the autumn.
Hey, that's very important. Oh, Tony, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. You've made me giggle, you've made me cry, and I can't wait to have you back in the future at some point. We'll do a catch up sometime. Before you go, where can people find you on social media?
Instagram is working out pretty well, and I've got a website too. So Tony Plant on any of those things. Other than that, on a beach somewhere probably. And if I'm wearing a hat, I won't be being rude. If I'm wearing a hat and I'm not speaking, it's just that I'll be rushing. But I will. I do love hearing people's stories and tales of the places that I'm drawing in. So I always welcome a chat, especially after.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, likewise. Right, I've got to go load up on coffee.
Oh, bless you. Thanks, Tony.
Toodaloo.
Bye.
Bye.
Tony's relationship with the outdoors is one of pure symbiotic beauty. He is in touch with the elements, working with them harmoniously to create temporary art for all to enjoy in the small fraction of time they can exist. And in his painting, a permanent reflection of the emotion and reaction it conjures within him. I can only imagine now what a loss it would have been if Tony hadn't pursued his passion in the way that he needed to. Thank goodness he had the intuition and foresight to say no to his initial course. That is such a crucially brave moment for all artists to consider. If what you're doing isn't a representation of who you really are, have the courage to say no. That sentiment ripples through to all our endeavours. If what you're doing isn't making you happy, say no. If the relationship isn't working, say no. If you're sick of your job, say no, and so on and so forth. I know that in that moment, it feels like you may be giving up on the one and only opportunity for you, especially if someone else has created it. But guess what? There will always be more opportunities because we can create them for ourselves, don't you know? It's incredible how you can always find a way if you want something enough. You are not as limited as you may think, be that in circumstance or talent. The brave moment we talk about on the show happens frequently in life. That little gut reaction, intuition, or feeling, it's always there if you listen. That is why this podcast exists, so that we can look at a whole range of different moments and see what others consider to be theirs. Every day we begin or end something. That moment could begin with a sigh, a breath, an impulsive decision, a gut feeling, a response to a book cover or conversation. You know what it is because chances are you'll be writing it in a New Year's list of resolutions next year. Seriously, though, it is ultimately a knowing sense that something must change. And if we can just take that deep breath and say to ourselves, okay, I am worth happiness. I am worth more than this. I am capable. Then we can find the courage to do as Tony did. Tony, by his own admission, doesn't consider what he does as anything out of the ordinary or particularly special, even though his onlookers would strongly disagree. But what he does, he is compelled to do. Tony is recording his life moment by moment with soulful reactive expression. What struck me most is that in order to capture or find this space for a piece, especially in the landscape, Tony has to employ many contributing factors. He watches the weather, the tides, the rocks and the sand, sometimes waiting for years to capture the elements in a way that satisfies not only him as the artist, but also the nature he is employing in his work. There is a great deal of preparation and intention behind his pieces, and when the timing is just right, a huge rush to produce in that moment what needs to be done. Before the interview that you hear today, I spoke to Tony online about the enjoyment of what he does. And he said, no, I don't enjoy it in the moment. It's hard work. Any artist will tell you this. It's frustrating and exhausting and requires all of your attention, and all whilst you battle the elements. So I asked why he did it, and he simply replied, because I have to do it. It's such a simple sentiment, but isn't that the truth? To be an artist is challenging of all your senses. You can feel every emotion under the sun, but that compelling, that urge, that necessity to create is your biggest badass compass. If it's pointing you towards something, do yourself a favor and listen. There is nothing worse than a frustrated artist. As Tony says, if you want to do it, go and do it. Us artists don't do it for the fame or fortune or success that you may receive from other careers. We do it because it's who we ultimately are. The thing I've noticed about truly successful artists is that they don't go out there looking for attention or praise of their work, and maybe that is one of the reasons why they receive it so often. Tony receives attention whether it's wanted or not, simply because his art evokes response, conversation, and interaction. This is very different from seeking gratification or limelight, something that our society seems to value highly these days. Tony prefers to don his brimmed hat, get on with whatever it is he is creating, and interact in the moment. His pleasure taken from mutual observation with another, sparking those all-important conversations about the shared environment, the memories conjured, and the interaction of strangers as a result of his momentary interruption in the landscape. As Tony says, art holds many truths. It isn't just one thing. It's not something that you can decide. It's something that simply is, and how others respond to it is what is meant to be. And if it does happen to create a larger than usual attention, let that be a byproduct as opposed to the reason you want to create. I see so many artists who sell out to other people's interpretations of what they think their art should be out there. From songwriters being guided to write in a certain way, to performers trying to look or sound different to please their social media followers, to artists trying to reproduce that one style of work that got them that magazine article. Stay true to who you are, no matter the cost, and let the world respond in whatever way they want to. Because at the end of the day, it's not really any of your business how they respond. I think it was Alan Rickman who said, if only life could be a little more tender and art a little more robust. Maybe in a world fueled by fear, greed, and illusionary power, the artist who can still find the will to dance in harmony with the rain is the one who holds all truth. For they haven't forgotten who they are, or more importantly, why they are. So go forth, my fellow artists, and work in harmony. Disrupt gracefully. Listen when your heart tells you no. Keep your hands free and your mind open. And maybe, just maybe, invest in a good hat. As Edgar Degas once said, art is not what you see, but what you can make others see. So let's all take a moment and look. Next week on the show, we speak to artist Rosie Burns about artistic toilet rolls, bras, and, well, you'll see. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the show. If you have a spare moment now, please like, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts in a review on Apple Podcasts, which will really help other people like yourself to find the show. Of course, you can also share the show with your friends by following us at the Brave Moment Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, or on Twitter at Moment Brave, or just follow the Linktree on all of our social media platforms. It's been so wonderful to have you all here with me again. Please get in touch with your own stories, and remember, your brave moment starts now.